It was a cold evening in Michigan, the kind of night where the wind howls like a lost soul, and the moon barely lights the way. The trees, naked of their leaves, swayed eerily, as if they were whispering secrets to one another. Secrets they had long kept hidden from the world. The roads were empty, save for the occasional car passing by, the headlights casting long shadows on the pavement. The air was thick, heavy, with the chill that seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing I wore. I could feel it in my bones, the way the night wrapped itself around me like an unseen presence, always lurking, always waiting. I had heard the stories, just like everyone else, the rumors of the abandoned asylum at the edge of town. People whispered about it, their voices hushed, with a mix of fear and fascination. It was a place where the past seemed to refuse to stay buried. A place of madness, where the very walls had witnessed unspeakable horrors. There were tales of patients who had been left to rot in their rooms, forgotten by the world outside. Some said the screams still echoed through the halls at night, the tortured souls of those who had never left, their cries for help trapped in time. But no one ever talked about it in detail. They just avoided it. Every now and then, someone would dare to venture close to the gates, but they never went inside. No one ever returned with a clear answer. Just more rumors, more whispers, more uncertainty. The asylum had been shut down decades ago after a series of mysterious deaths. No one ever fully explained what had happened. Some said it was a natural disaster that had caused the closure, while others whispered about illegal experiments, or worse, murders that had taken place within those decaying walls. No matter what the truth was, the place remained locked away, sealed off from the world as if it had never existed. A scar on the land, a wound that refused to heal. But tonight, I was different. I wasn't like the others who simply looked at it from a distance, who let their curiosity fester in secret, but never dared to go further. I wasn't content to let it remain a shadow in the corners of my mind. I needed to know. What had really happened in that asylum? Why did people still talk about it in hushed tones, as if the place still had a grip on their souls? Was it the building itself, or was it something darker? Something that had festered inside the minds of those who had spent too long there. I stood before the rusted gates, the weight of my decision settling heavily on my chest. The gates were tall, overgrown with ivy, their iron bars twisted and warped by years of neglect. The stone pillars on either side were cracked, the mortar crumbling away as time took its toll. A sign, long faded and barely legible, hung crookedly from one of the posts. It was a warning, no doubt. Do not enter. But the words were barely visible, as if the asylum itself had tried to erase all memory of its existence. And yet, here I was. My hand gripped the cold metal of the gate, feeling the rough texture beneath my fingers. It was strange, almost unreal. How had I gotten here? Why was I doing this? I could hear the wind whistling through the trees, the only sound in the otherwise still night. It almost felt like the asylum was waiting for me, as if it had known this day would come. My heart pounded in my chest, the anticipation and fear making it difficult to breathe. But there was no turning back now. I stepped forward, pushing open the gate. It creaked, the sound piercing the silence like a scream. The chill of the night air wrapped around me, biting at my skin as I crossed the threshold. I had crossed into the unknown. The asylum stood before me, its massive structure looming in the distance. The building was as imposing as I had imagined, an ancient monument to suffering and fear. It was 3 stories tall, with windows that stared out like vacant eyes. Some of the windows were shattered, the glass long since broken, while others were covered in grime, blocking any hint of what lay beyond. The walls of the building were made of stone, weathered by time and the elements. Some parts of the structure seemed to be sinking into the ground, as if the building itself were slowly being consumed by the earth. The closer I got, the more I could feel it. The weight of the place, the heaviness in the air that pressed down on me, making it harder to breathe. The asylum felt alive in a way I couldn't explain, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to make my move. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to be following me. But there was nothing, just the cold, empty air and the creaking of the old iron gate swinging behind me. I stepped closer to the building, my footsteps echoing on the gravel path that led up to the front door. I could feel my heart racing, my nerves fraying with every step. I had to remind myself why I was here. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was about finding answers, about uncovering the truth that had been hidden for so long. Whatever horrors had taken place in this place, I needed to know. I had to face them. I reached the front door, the heavy wood towering above me. It was dark, and the door appeared to be locked, the handle cold to the touch. But then, as I reached for it, I noticed something strange, a faint light flickering from inside. It wasn't much, just a dim glow that seemed to be coming from somewhere deep within the building. I hesitated. Was I imagining it, or was there someone else inside? With a deep breath, I grasped the handle and turned. The door creaked open slowly, its hinges protesting with a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if the building itself were groaning in pain, waking from a long slumber. As the door swung open, a rush of cold air hit me, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. It was the smell of years of abandonment, the kind of smell that clung to everything it touched. Inside, the darkness was thick, almost suffocating. I could barely make out the shapes of old furniture, toppled and decaying, and the faded remnants of wallpaper peeling from the walls. My flashlight flickered in my hand, barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the distance. But then I heard it. A soft noise. A whisper. It was faint at first, just a rustle, like the wind moving through the cracks in the building. But then it grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from somewhere inside. A voice? No. A whisper. A whisper that seemed to be calling to me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Was it just my imagination? Or was something, or someone, waiting for me in the darkness? A door creaked open with a sound that made my spine tingle, as if the building itself was groaning in response to my intrusion. The hallway beyond was cloaked in darkness, the kind of darkness that seemed to have weight, like it was pressing down on me. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, its beams struggling against the thick, oppressive air that surrounded me. The room smelled old, stale, musty, like mildew and decay. It wasn't just the smell of abandonment, though. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at the back of my mind as I breathed it in. I could feel the weight of the asylum pressing on me from all sides, the darkness closing in with every step I took. The floor creaked beneath my boots, sending ripples through the silence that hung in the air. The walls, cracked and peeling, seemed to lean in toward me, as if they were trying to hold something in, something I wasn't meant to see. The faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance, the only sound that kept me company as I moved deeper into the building. The further I walked, the more unsettling it became. The darkness seemed to thicken, like it was alive, shifting with each step I took. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but I could have sworn I felt eyes on me from the shadows. There was a presence in this place, something watching from the corners, something waiting. My heartbeat quickened, but I pushed the feeling aside. I wasn't here to be scared. I was here to find answers. A hallway stretched endlessly before me, the light from my flashlight barely making a dent in the blackness. There was a chill in the air, colder than the night outside, and it seemed to seep into my bones with every breath. I could feel it, deep down. This place wasn't just abandoned. It had been forgotten for a reason. Something had happened here, something terrible. And whatever it was still here. My footfalls echoed as I walked down the hallway, the sound of my boots striking the wooden floor loud in the otherwise silent asylum. There was a strange stillness to the place, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. But nothing came, only the sound of my own breath, shallow and quick, filling the emptiness around me. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach turn. Papers. Everywhere. They were scattered across the floor, crumpled, torn, yellowed with age. Patient records. I crouched down to examine them, my fingers trembling as I picked them up. The names on the papers were faded, the ink smudged from years of neglect, but the words still managed to pierce through the haze of time. I saw one name that made my heart stop. Emma Ward. The name stood out from the rest, the letters dark and bold against the otherwise fading text. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking as I scanned the notes. There wasn't much written about her, just a few lines, a few words, but they sent a chill down my spine. Violent tendencies. Dangerous. And then the last line. Death under mysterious circumstances. The words hung in the air like a fog, thick and suffocating. Emma Ward. I didn't know who she was, but the words on the paper told me everything I needed to know. She had been a patient here, locked away in this place, and something had happened to her. Something that had led to her death. But what? And why had it been so mysterious? I stood there in the dim light, the papers in my hands, as the weight of the asylum's history pressed down on me. What kind of place was this? What kind of horrors had these walls witnessed? I couldn't help but feel that I was being drawn deeper into something I wasn't ready to understand. But there was no turning back now. The whispers had already started. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the sound of the wind playing tricks on me. But as I stood there, I heard it again, a faint whisper, too soft to make out, just on the edge of hearing. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the asylum, from the shadows that seemed to move on their own. I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source, but the hallway was empty. The air was still, the silence almost suffocating. But then I heard it again, louder this time, a voice, a whisper, and then another. The words were indecipherable, a jumble of sounds that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the wind, I realized. There was something else in this place. Something alive. Something that didn't want me here. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls, swirling around me like a storm. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My flashlight flickered again, the beam trembling as if it too was afraid of what lurked in the dark. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, moving with a life of their own, closing in around me. I could feel it now. The presence in the air. Something was in here with me. I wasn't alone. For a moment, I stood completely still, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers were all around me now, growing louder, more urgent. They weren't just voices. They were screams, barely audible, like distant echoes of pain and terror. My head spun. The words from the papers, Emma Ward's name, the strange sensation of being watched. It all began to blur together. I stumbled backward, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides, suffocating, smothering. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to get out. But as I turned to leave, I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure, a shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a person. I could see the outline of a body, faint but unmistakable. The figure was standing there, motionless, staring at me with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. I couldn't. The figure didn't move either. It just stood there, watching me. The whispers grew louder, now drowning out everything else. The figure began to step forward, its movements slow, deliberate, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my body unwilling to obey my commands. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The whispers stopped. The air grew still once again. I blinked, unable to process what had just happened. Was it real? Had I imagined it? Or was the asylum playing tricks on my mind? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. Whatever I had come here to find, I wasn't going to find it easily. The asylum was alive, and it wasn't ready to let me go just yet. I had heard that some of the patients here were not just mentally ill, they were broken. The asylum was notorious for its cruel treatments, its experiments, its disregard for human dignity. Over the years, it had been whispered that many patients were not just treated for their conditions, but subjected to horrors that no one should ever have to endure. The stories were never clear, but one thing was certain. The patients who ended up here, they weren't simply unwell. They were shattered. Their minds were in pieces, and the asylum was where they went to die, piece by piece. As I moved deeper into the asylum, I began to understand why it had earned its reputation. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of mildew and decay. But it wasn't just the building that smelled of neglect. It was the history of it, the suffering that had taken place behind these walls, the lives that had been destroyed here, left a residue in the air, something palpable and suffocating. The hallways were narrow, the walls covered in peeling paint that looked as though it might crumble to dust if I touched it. The floors creaked under my feet, echoing through the silence like some kind of warning. I felt like I was intruding on something that had been long forgotten. Something that had been hidden away for a reason. But no matter how dark it felt, my curiosity pushed me further. I had to know. What had happened here? Who were these patients? What had the doctors and caretakers done to them? As I wandered through the building, I found myself standing in front of a small door. It was a simple wooden door, no different from the others in this forsaken place, except for the sign that hung crookedly above it, almost as though it was trying to escape its own existence. The quiet room. A shiver ran down my spine as I read the words. What kind of room was called the quiet room? It sounded too innocent, too calm for the horrors I was starting to feel in this place. I had heard that this room was where patients were sent when they became too loud, too disruptive. The ones who screamed too much, who fought too hard to hold on to their sanity. They were placed here, isolated, alone, and silenced. I didn't know if it was out of fear or something darker, but I couldn't stop myself from reaching for the handle. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and for a moment, I hesitated. Something in the air felt wrong, as if the room itself was waiting for me. But I didn't stop. I twisted the handle and pushed the door open. The door creaked loudly, far too loudly in the dead silence of the asylum. The room inside was dim, lit only by the faintest light seeping in from the cracked windows. The air was heavy, thick with the stench of old rot. My flashlight swept over the room, and I took in my surroundings. The space was smaller than I expected, barely large enough for a bed and a chair. It was barren, almost entirely empty, except for one thing that made my blood run cold. The walls. The walls were covered in marks, deep scratches and smudges, all of them leading up to a single spot in the far corner. The scratches were jagged, uneven, some almost torn into the surface, as if someone had been clawing at the walls in a desperate attempt to escape. The marks weren't just on the lower part of the walls either. They were all over, at varying heights, as if the person had been frantically scrambling up and down, trying to get away from something invisible, or perhaps something that wasn't meant to be seen. I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized the implications of what I was looking at. These weren't just scratches. These were the desperate, frantic attempts of someone or something trying to get out. I walked further into the room, my feet dragging slightly, as though the air itself was trying to hold me back. And then I saw it. A faint handprint. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the broken window. But as I stepped closer, I could see the truth of it. The handprint was smeared in blood. Fresh blood. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as the reality of what I was looking at sank in. This wasn't just some abstract record of a patient's final moments. This was something real. Something that had happened here, in this room. The handprint was still there, its shape distorted and smeared, as if the person who had left it had been pulled away too soon, dragged out of the room in a hurry. I could feel a tightness in my chest, like I was being suffocated by the air itself. Was this the final act of someone who had been trapped here, driven mad by the cruelty of this place? Or had someone or something, been responsible for whatever had happened in this room. I didn't know. The more I looked at the handprint, the more my mind raced, my thoughts colliding and spinning out of control. I could hear the whispers again, faint at first, but then growing louder. The voices of the past, the tortured souls of the patients who had been locked away here, their minds shattered by the cruelty they'd endured. The whispers echoed in my ears, unintelligible at first, but then slowly forming into words. Words I couldn't understand, but that made my skin crawl. It was as if they were calling out to me, telling me to leave, warning me. But it was too late. I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going. I stepped closer to the wall, running my fingers along the scratches. The walls felt cold, as though they had absorbed the torment of those who had come before me. I wanted to pull my hand away, but I couldn't. Something kept me there, something compelling me to look deeper. And then, just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard it. A faint sound. So faint, so distant, that I thought I might be imagining it. A soft, guttural moan. It came from behind me, from somewhere in the depths of the asylum. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the quiet, empty room. The shadows pressed in, stretching across the walls, pulling the light from my flashlight. The moan came again, louder this time, closer. It was unmistakable. It was human. I backed away slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The whispers grew louder, the sound of them rising like a chorus. My mind raced, but I couldn't process what was happening. I was alone. I had to be. No one else could be here. Yet, something was here. Something was watching me. I turned and ran. I had to get out of that room. I had to leave this place before whatever haunted these walls claimed me to. But as I ran down the hall, the whispers followed, growing louder and more frantic, like they were chasing me. I had no idea how I managed to make it back to the main corridor, but when I finally reached the door, my hand was trembling so badly that it took me several tries to open it. The air outside felt colder than I had remembered, but I didn't care. I had to leave. I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know what I had seen or what I had felt. But one thing was certain. I wasn't alone in this place, and whatever was here didn't want me to leave. The deeper I ventured into the asylum, the darker it became, as though the shadows were thickening with each step, swallowing me whole. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I tried to push through, telling myself that this was just the fear of the unknown creeping in. But with every step, the sense of something wrong grew stronger, more palpable. It wasn't just the silence that surrounded me. It was the weight of what had happened here, lingering in the very walls. It wasn't just the decay and disrepair of the building. It was the history of pain and madness that clung to every corner. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound echoed through the hallways, so deep it made my bones rattle. Was it the wind? The old rotting wood groaning under the weight of years? Or was it something worse? Something far more sinister? I paused, trying to focus on the sound, but it was so faint. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The noise stopped as quickly as it had started, leaving me standing in the growing dark, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to keep moving, though. The fear was gripping me, but I couldn't let it stop me. I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. I stumbled forward, my flashlight barely cutting through the gloom, the narrow corridors, twisting and turning in a way that made it impossible to track my progress. The walls seemed to close in around me, like they were aware of my every movement. The whispers had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the darkness getting to me, and then I found it. A door, slightly ajar. The faintest light seeped out from the crack, an eerie glow that made my heart skip a beat. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to open it. Something inside me urged me forward, like the room behind the door was calling me. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. What lay beyond made my stomach churn. The room looked like a medical chamber, but it wasn't like any medical room I had ever seen. The walls were stained with something I couldn't quite identify. Dried patches of dark liquid that made my skin crawl. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered across a counter, their edges chipped and dulled by years of neglect. The air smelled different here, sharper, like something more metallic. It felt wrong, like the room had been abandoned in a hurry, as if it was left behind the moment whatever happened here had gone too far. But there was something else in the room that caught my attention. A blood-stained sheet on the floor. It was impossible to miss. The sheet was crumpled, the fabric darkened in spots with blood. But what sent chills down my spine was the fact that the blood looked fresh. Too fresh. For a place as old as this, where time seemed to have stopped, this blood should have been long dried, yet it glistened faintly under the weak beam of my flashlight. It looked like it had been spilled just hours ago, maybe less. I took a step closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. My heart was hammering in my chest as I dropped to my knees beside the sheet. The blood had soaked into the fabric in uneven patches, but I could make out a shape, like something had been dragged across the floor, leaving a trail behind. The sheet had been used to cover something, or someone, recently. But who? And why was this room still here, so untouched, so eerily intact? Before I could gather my thoughts, my flashlight flickered. The light buzzed, dimming for a moment before going completely out. I gasped, panic rising in my chest. I tapped it desperately, trying to make the light come back, but it was no use. The darkness around me seemed to swallow me whole. The room was silent now, except for my own breathing, which sounded too loud in my ears. I couldn't see a thing. My hand fumbled for the flashlight switch, my fingers trembling as I tried to turn it back on. And then the door slammed shut. I froze. The sudden sound of the door, crashing against its frame, echoed through the room, louder than anything I had heard before. My breath caught in my throat as I whipped around to face the door, but there was nothing there. I was trapped, completely alone, in the pitch black, surrounded by the remnants of whatever horror had happened here. My heart was racing now, each beat louder than the last, threatening to burst out of my chest. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone was keeping me in. I couldn't understand why. Was it the asylum itself? Or had something more sinister taken control of this place? The darkness around me seemed to press in, suffocating me. My breath came faster, shallower, as the walls seemed to close in even tighter. My pulse quickened as I moved to the door again, pounding on it, trying to force my way out. But the door wouldn't move. And then I heard it. A scream. A woman's scream. A long, tortured scream that pierced the silence like a knife. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, coming from somewhere deep within the asylum. The sound sent a shock of ice through my veins, my body frozen in place. The scream wasn't just a scream. It was the kind of scream that came from the very soul. The kind of scream that rattled your bones and made your skin crawl. The kind of scream that was born from pure terror. I stood there, paralyzed by the sound, my mind racing to comprehend what was happening. The scream seemed to echo through the entire building, reverberating off the walls, filling the air with its unearthly wail. I could hear the desperation, the fear, the agony in that scream. It was as if the woman was pleading for someone, anyone, to help her, but no one came. No one ever did. The scream fed off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. But the silence didn't last. The low, guttural sound returned. A noise so deep, so unnatural, that it rattled me to the core. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't just the building settling. No, this was something far worse. Something more primal. Something alive. I could feel the temperature drop suddenly, a cold that seeped into my bones, freezing me in place. My breath came out in shaky puffs, and I realized just how vulnerable I was. I had no way out, no way to escape the madness that had taken hold of this place. The whispers had started again, soft at first, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. But as they grew louder, I could hear the voices, more than one now, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The whispers swirled around me, like a storm, pushing and pulling at my sanity. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, darker than the rest of the room. It moved, shifting in the corner, like something alive, something that was waiting for me. I turned toward it, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the shadow was gone, leaving nothing behind but the darkness. I was losing my grip on reality. I had to get out of here. I had to escape before whatever was in this building took me too. But as I stumbled toward the door again, I knew it was too late. The asylum had claimed me, and there was no leaving it now. The scream rang out again, and this time it was so close. It felt like it was inside my head. And that was when I realized this wasn't just a place of madness. This was a place where the murders never ended, where the souls of the dead never left, and I was just another one of its victims. When the door finally opened, the first thing I noticed was the air. It felt fresher somehow than it had inside, but it was still cold, bitterly so. The Michigan night wrapped itself around me like a tight shroud, the cold cutting through my clothes, but it was the air itself that made me shiver. It wasn't just the chill, it was the quiet. I was standing outside, but I couldn't remember how I had gotten there. I tried to gather my bearings, but my mind was foggy, as if I had been drugged, or perhaps sleepwalking through the asylum's decaying halls. My body felt heavy, like it had been pulled through thick mud, and my thoughts were clouded, disjointed, like I was waking up from a dream I couldn't remember fully. But then I saw it. A figure in the distance, standing just outside the perimeter of the asylum, far enough away that I had to squint to make her out. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the light, a figment of my mind's exhaustion, but the longer I looked, the more real she became. A woman. She was standing alone, motionless, bathed in the pale moonlight. Her back was straight, her posture rigid, but it wasn't her stance that caught my attention. It was her eyes. Her eyes were wide with terror, fear etched deeply into every feature of her face, and there was something else there too, something more familiar than it should have been. I blinked, my breath caught in my throat. I had seen those eyes before. I was sure of it. But where? Who was she? The woman didn't move, but I could feel the pull of her gaze, a silent beckoning. I started walking toward her, slow at first, but my pace quickened with each step. There was an instinct deep inside me telling me that I needed to reach her, that I needed to see her face, to understand why she seemed so familiar. And then it hit me. Emma Ward. Her name flashed through my mind like a lightning bolt, sharp and clear. Emma Ward, one of the patients I had read about earlier in the asylum. Her file had been one of the first things I had come across, a list of short, cryptic notes about her violent tendencies, her dangerous behavior, and the vague, unsettling note, death under mysterious circumstances. But that was not what haunted me now. It was her face, the look in her eyes. She had been trapped in that place, just like the others. But there was something different about her, something that had drawn me to her. I had felt it in the air when I saw her name. I had felt it in the cold, in the whispers. She had been part of the darkness that had consumed the asylum. I stopped a few feet away from her, but she didn't say a word. She didn't move. She simply stood there, staring at me with eyes full of sorrow, of pain, of something far worse than I could have ever imagined. It felt like the world around us stood still, frozen in time. The wind had stopped howling. The trees no longer swayed. There was only the sound of my own breath, shallow and ragged in the stillness. The whispers that had plagued me inside the asylum had vanished completely, leaving nothing but a thick silence that pressed in on me like a suffocating weight. The silence was worse than the noise had ever been. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than any noise, a deafening emptiness that swallowed everything around me. The kind of silence that made my thoughts feel distant, as though they were floating away from me, leaving me alone with nothing but the overwhelming sense of something terrible hanging in the air. And then she moved, her head tilted slightly, her eyes still fixed on mine. And I could feel it, the madness. It wasn't just her fear that I could see now. It was something deeper. It was as if I could see into her soul, the way she had been twisted by the asylum's cruelty. She had been a prisoner in that place, just like all the others. But the difference was that Emma had never escaped. Her mind had been shattered in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. And now her soul was trapped in this world, bound by the horrors that had been done to her. I could feel it. The desperate need to escape, to flee from whatever it was that had claimed her. Whatever it was that still held this asylum in its grip. The insanity of it all. The suffocating terror of being trapped in a place like this. Surrounded by darkness, surrounded by ghosts. For a moment I thought I saw something in her eyes. A flicker of recognition, of shared understanding, as if she were telling me that she understood my fear. She knew what it felt like to be trapped. She knew what it was like to be lost in the shadows of this place. But then, it was gone. That moment of connection. Her eyes went blank, lifeless, and I knew, with a horrible certainty, that she was no longer really there. Emma Ward was gone. I stumbled backward, my mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. My body felt heavy, and the cold wind was biting at my skin, but all I could hear in my mind was the deafening silence, the darkness. The realization that this place was not just a physical location. It was a tomb for the souls of those who had died here, a prison for the ones who had never truly left. And then, the truth struck me with the force of a tidal wave. Emma's death had not been an accident. It had been murder. The asylum's ghosts were not just angry. They were hungry. Hungry for revenge. Hungry for the destruction of everything that had caused them pain, that had broken them. They were trapped in the darkness, feeding on the terror and the agony of everyone who had ever entered these walls. I took one last look at Emma's figure, her eyes locked onto mine as if she were trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't decipher it. I turned away, a shudder of cold fear running through me, but as I started to walk, I could feel it, the sensation of being followed, of being watched. I wasn't alone. The echoes of the asylum's madness followed me. The whispers, the creaks, the low, guttural sounds that seemed to pulse through the air. It was as though the asylum was alive, a living, breathing entity that had consumed everything in its path, and now it wanted more. I glanced back one last time, and Emma was gone. But I knew she wasn't really gone. She was still here. All of them were. The spirits of the broken, the lost, the ones who had died and never left. And they weren't content to remain silent anymore. They were angry. They wanted justice. And they were coming for me too. The asylum's hunger was far from satisfied. It had fed on the pain of the past, but now it wanted the souls of the living. And I had just walked into its grasp. I couldn't escape. I tried, but the asylum had a grip on me now, an iron hold that seemed to pull me back with every step I took. It wasn't just a place. It was a part of me, wrapped itself around my thoughts, sinking deep into my mind, burrowing into my very soul. I felt it gnawing at the edges of my sanity, like a slow, relentless tide, rising higher with every attempt I made to break free. The moments inside that forsaken place had infected me, and I realized then that it wasn't just the asylum I couldn't escape. It was the madness. The same madness that had destroyed everyone who had ever been inside. The same madness that had twisted Emma Ward's mind until she became nothing more than a shadow of herself, screaming for an escape she would never find. The madness that now wrapped its cold fingers around my heart. I tried to run from it. I thought that by leaving, by putting miles between myself and the asylum, I could outrun whatever dark force had taken hold of me. I thought that if I just left the crumbling walls behind, I would be free. But the further I drove away that night, the more I realized that it wasn't the asylum that had been holding me captive. It was something far worse, something far more insidious. As I sped down the dark, desolate road, my headlights casting long shadows over the empty street, I glanced in my rearview mirror. My eyes instinctively sought the silhouette of the asylum. It was still there, looming against the night sky like a dark sentinel, a quiet predator waiting in the shadows. Its broken windows stared back at me, empty and hollow, but still seeming to watch, still seeming to call me back. I could almost hear it. The whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling me. The ghosts that still wandered its halls. Emma's eyes, wide with fear, had haunted me all the way out of that place, and now they were back. In my rear-view mirror, the asylum stood as if it were alive, its walls pulsing with the remnants of everything that had happened there. It felt like it was waiting for me, waiting for my return. I knew it then. I couldn't run. Not from the asylum, not from Emma Ward's spirit. I couldn't ignore the pull, the feeling that something had been left unfinished, something that had to be uncovered. Someone had to know the truth about what had really happened to her and to the others who had suffered there, forgotten by time, left to rot in the darkness. The asylum wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a prison for the lost, the broken, and the damned. And it was calling me back. But deep down, I knew what awaited me in the shadows. I knew what I had felt in the depths of the asylum. The madness, the murders, the echoes of the tortured souls who had never left. It had been there all along, hiding in the cracks, waiting for someone to notice, to listen, to uncover the truth. And now it was waiting for me. I had felt its presence in the very air, suffocating me, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I had heard the whispers, felt the eyes watching me from the corners of my vision. I had seen the blood-stained sheets, the marks on the walls, and I had felt the cold, empty presence of those who had died there, trapped between life and death, forever prisoners of the asylum. I had thought that once I escaped the asylum's grip, I would be free. But it wasn't that easy. I couldn't forget. I couldn't move on. The asylum had burrowed into me, and now it was a part of me. The more I tried to forget, the more the memories came flooding back. The screams, the whispers, the terror. And it wasn't just Emma Ward's death that haunted me. It was the others. The ones whose names were lost to history. The ones whose screams had never been heard. Their spirits were still there, lost in the shadows of the asylum, forever calling out for someone to find them, to bring their torment to light. I turned my head away from the rearview mirror, focusing on the road ahead. But even as I tried to push the thoughts away, I could feel the pull, the call, the asylum's grip. It was there, lurking just below the surface of my thoughts, waiting for the moment when I would return. And deep inside, I knew I would. I had no choice. There was something unfinished, something that had to be done. The truth about Emma Ward, about the others, it had to be uncovered. But what would I find when I went back? Would I be able to bear what was waiting for me? Or would I, too, be swallowed by the darkness? Just another lost soul wandering the halls, screaming in silence. I didn't know. I didn't have the answers. But I knew I had to go back. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about all of them. The souls that had been lost, trapped in the madness of that place. They needed to be freed, even if it meant facing the darkness head-on. The further I drove, the heavier the weight on my chest became. I could feel the fear creeping back into my veins, my breath becoming shallow as the road stretched on in front of me. The headlights flickered, casting brief, jagged shadows along the asphalt. The night seemed endless. And then I saw it again, the figure in my rearview mirror. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, a result of my exhaustion, the fear, the way the road twisted in the headlights. But it wasn't. It was her again, Emma. Her figure stood there in the distance, just like before. Her eyes wide with terror, her body motionless. It wasn't just the asylum that was calling me back. It was her. Her spirit was trapped there, bound to that place forever. And now she was calling for me to return, to uncover the truth, to free her from whatever horror had claimed her. I slammed my foot on the brake, bringing the car to a screeching halt on the side of the road. The figure disappeared from the mirror, and I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That something was out there in the dark, waiting for me to make the next move. And I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. It wasn't just the asylum anymore. It was my own sanity that was at stake. The ghosts of the past, the screams, the terror, they were all part of me now, and I couldn't run. I couldn't escape. This nightmare was just beginning, and I had to face it. I had to confront the darkness, or it would consume me. I took a deep breath and turned the car around, heading back toward the place that had marked me forever. The asylum was waiting for me, just as it always had been. Its story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And with every mile I drove, I could feel the grip of the madness tightening once more. This was only the beginning of my nightmare.